can't drive a car. Well, what happened to Sabbath? Well, the handwriting of the rituals were nailed to the cross of Christ in Colossians 2:14 when he was nailed to the cross, and when you did away with one contract, started another, you would drive a nail through the original contract out in public in the presence of the two original contractors. You would have two witnesses, and that would hold up in their courts of law. And the Bible says, blotting out the handwriting of ordinance which was against us, which is contrary to us, took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. The ritual of the Sabbath was nailed to the cross, but the law is still here. The Sabbath now is resting every day in these doctrines we call predestination, knowing that God has ordained everything to be. It's resting, and you had to cease from your own works. Well, we cease from sin, which is our works, and and you'll find this over in the 3rd and the 4th chapter of the book of Hebrews, that we enter into God's rest by belief. So when you believe God, you don't believe God for something. You believe Him, period, that everything that's going on is of Him. And this is how we enter into the rest of God. We rest in all the things that's going on. When you actually enter into the Sabbath, you quit worrying, you quit stressing out, and you believe God has preordained everything to be the way they are, regardless of whether they're good or bad or how you feel about them. That's the true Sabbath. And that's what Hebrews, the 3rd and the 4th chapter, talks about. And it equates the word rest with the Sabbath. So, Sabbath is not like some people think. They say, well, the Pope changed the Sabbath to Sunday. No, he didn't. He changed the worship in the Catholic Church to Sunday. But from the beginning, the church was worshiping on the first day of the week, because that's the day Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday morning, and he gathered together with the apostles in what they called an agape love feast. That was every first day of the week, every what we call Sunday. They gathered together to eat together, what they call break bread, which meant to have a meal. And in this agape love feast, they would take up offerings for the poor and the needy, and they would bring food for them so they could take it home with them. This is what was happening in the 11th chapter of 1 Corinthians. So the Sabbath is not one day a week. It is every day. You can't even match up Sunday with the Sabbath. It doesn't even match the old Sabbath of the Old Testament, which is our Saturday. It doesn't match because people say they're Seventh-day worshipers, and they go to church driving a car, starting up all these cylinders in their car, starting fires, and you can't start a fire on the Sabbath. You couldn't ride some mobility around, whether it was an ass or a donkey of some kind, and you couldn't even walk away from your house. You had to stay at your house. You had to prepare all your food. You couldn't even cook food. You certainly couldn't go to a restaurant. You go to some Seventh-day church, you certainly couldn't go to a restaurant and cause somebody else to break your Sabbath for you by cooking a meal for you. You couldn't burn gas in your car. You couldn't watch football you couldn't watch college football on Saturday afternoon, because that's entertainment. You couldn't have any pleasure on the Sabbath. So the Sunday doesn't match up with the Sabbath at all. It's when we rest, we cease from our own works, which is a type of our sin. We cease from our sin. We begin to look at all the things that happen, and we believe. And the Bible says we enter into His rest by belief. So what that's talking about is you're believing that everything that's going on is supposed to go on, whether it's good or evil, and you rest in the fact that you say God is doing it. Believing God is just that. It's believing God, period. End of the sentence. You don't believe Him for something. You don't believe Him to give you a job. You don't believe Him to... You believe whatever He has ordained to be is going on. That's what prayer is. Prayer, prosukoma, means to bow to the will of God. Prayer, when you bow to the will of God, it doesn't mean you're letting God have His will by bowing to His will. His will is being done whether you bow to it or not. It's when you start to bow to what's going on, and it's going to be anyway, that's when you start praying. It's when you start saying, it's going on, you're doing it, I bow to it, Lord. However you want me to work into it is fine with me. That is what really makes life easier to live, when you really learn to pray. It used to bother me when I was a kid. Why would the apostles come to Jesus and say, Lord, teach us to pray? You mean teach me to pray, oh God, I need a new car and I need a new house and I need a job making $40 or $50 an hour. Now, you can do that, Kate. I believe you're going to do it for me. Thank you. It's not prayer. It's wishing. Prayer is bowing to what is being done. Whether you bow or not, it's going to be done. So that's a hard place to come to, isn't it? See, if you start buying the will of God, you quit stressing out. You quit taking thought for your life, worrying. You quit stressing out over what you think should be, and you start trying to figure a way to straighten God out on it. So, and that's what we do, don't we? And but I'm thankful for getting old so I can learn about His will. You'll fight God so long, and you wake up one day and you say, I'm just a weakling human being. Why am I fighting the God of the universe, worrying and stressing out over life? When you come to that, that's when life gets tolerable. But it's, whether you get tolerable or not, it's still the will of God. See, that the point is, His will is going to be done. You can either fight it or accept it. Y'all want to do that? Huh? No, we don't want to do that. I know you don't. That's why you say, I'm going to stress out over this. I'm getting mad at this guy for doing that. And I'm going to get... God has them do that so they can get under your skin so you can learn not to do that. Right? Boy, we know that, but boy, do we ever have time getting it through our thick skulls, don't we? Predestination is a doctrine you live by. Greg was working on one of the cars one day, and I said, don't get frustrated. This is a doctrine to live by. If the car stays broke, that's fine with me. So ain't no need you getting bent out of shape because it is broke, because you're banging your hand or your head or something. Except the fact you're banging your head. You're supposed to. If you work on cars, are you going to bump your knuckles once in a while? If you're a carpenter, are you going to hit your hand once in a while or bang something or cut something on a saw? Yeah, that's supposed to be. I ain't never seen anybody work that kind of a job that didn't bang themselves up. That's just part of living, part of life. I'm always saying that to people. I did this, Jim, and it messed up. And I said, well, it's part of life, isn't it? And it is. Boy, we have a hard time getting that in our heads. It's supposed to be. If you don't ever break nothing, you're not doing nothing. All right? In order to do a whole lot, you got to break some things. You got to make some mistakes and goof up, mess up. All right, well, that's enough preaching. Let me preach. All right. That's that one. Boy, I can get in. I did a 10 or 12 tape series on the spiritual Sabbath. Very interesting. And the Bible spells it out. That's what it does. Very good series. I really like that series. And Sabbath is one of the big questions people have. They always have questions on rapture. Is there a pre-trib rapture? And of course, there's not. And I went through several series on no pre-trib rapture. And they always have that question. Some of them have questions on tongues. I do entire series just on tongues. I did 126 DVD series on tongues. I did another one 15 or something like that. And they always want to know about the Lord's Supper. Should we be doing that? No. Jesus was eating the last Passover. There's a spiritual Passover. I do a spiritual Passover series. I've done that several times. It runs 8 to 10 messages. And these are the things that people ask about. The baptism, tongues, the so-called communion, and the rapture thing, and Sabbath. They ask for that. And I've got a whole series on all this. And I've got, what else is it they ask for? Of course, they ask for prophecy, and I've got hundreds of DVDs on prophecy. I did a 18-month series on Sunday morning on the 70 weeks of Daniel. That's a doctrine that most doctors of theology don't want to teach on. The reason I teach the way I teach, I do everything in series. You cannot cover a subject in one message, not even in two messages, not even in part one, part two. We're doing this atonement series, and we've been in it several months, and we're going to stay in it until we get fairly exhaustive, at least. You won't exhaust anything, but we can get at least thoroughly into it, and we won't quit that until we get enough into that. I've got just so many notes I want to get to. We've been in the demon series about 2.5 years. That demons are not real, that they're self. Well, I have people if you're watching, you want the demon series, it's on the internet, at least, I believe since last year ago, July, every Sunday night we preach on the Doctrine of the Devil. That's the demon series. And, gosh, I was trying to think what else we did. A whole bunch of stuff. I've done the Eyes of the Lord series. I've done a series. The hair series. I did a hair series. I did a Melchizedek series. People want to know about Melchizedek. I did a 5 or 6 message series on Melchizedek.
Gospel in the Stars.
Gospel in the Stars. I did the bread series. The prayer series. There's no such thing as asking God what you want and getting it and believing. And I've done series on the charismatics. I've covered everything that they come up with and shows you that everything that they're saying is a lie. 100% of the charismatic and Pentecostal doctrine is a lie. Even the Baptists are teaching a lie. And you say, well, what do you mean? How can everything they say be a lie? They talk about Jesus, don't they? No, they talk about another Jesus. Because if the doctrine isn't true, then it's not the Jesus of the Bible, it's another Jesus that Paul said in 2 Corinthians 11:4. I did a false prophecy or false prophets series back 10 or 12 years ago. I did that every Sunday morning for a couple of years or something like that. So everything we do is we get thorough with it. And if there's anything that you want, if you're watching, and you want one of the series, if you call or write to us, Mary, my wife, and Tom will get you the first 3 in a given series. But there's so many people asking for these, and they're free. We don't charge for them. And you get the first 3 in a series. You have to keep up with the numbers. And then when you call back for the next 3 in that series, you have to remember the number. You have to keep up with them. And say, this is the last one I did in the series. Oh, yes, I did a Revelation series for 4.5 years on Sunday night. And we covered the book of Revelation like unbelievable. Through nearly every word in the book defined everything, all the cultures, all the customs. Nothing in Revelation is like what you're hearing in these pulpits from these so-called prophecy teachers. Some guy on radio Hank Hanegraaff. Hank's got his new Revelation series. Yeah, I'm sure he's really wonderful at that. He's free will. He's a tongue speaker. He's a faith healer. And how's he going to understand Revelation? They read a verse and say, and you see, there's scorpions here, and these scorpions, these are locusts. They're like scorpions, see, and you know, a locust it looks like a helicopter, and then they get goofy and they get off the deep end and say stupid things. And what's funny is in that first chapter of Revelation, it says, "Blessed is he that readeth and understands the words of this book." Well, how could you be blessed if you read the words of the book and it was helicopters? You couldn't. In other words, you couldn't, if these locusts were helicopters in the 9th chapter of Revelation, you wouldn't be able to understand the book in the 2nd century, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, or 6th. During the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, you couldn't understand Revelation because you didn't know nothing about helicopters. It's not helicopters, it's false teachers. It's just, that's how frustrated I get with a world that don't care about what God's saying. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's remember our TV, Monday night, Saturday night at 10 o'clock, channel 176, Wednesday morning, Friday morning at midnight, channel 176, and then Thursday night on channel 49 at 11 o'clock, and then Tuesday evening at channel 3 in Hendersonville, and Channel 3 in Hendersonville Thursday night, 7 o'clock, and radio every Saturday morning, 1300 on the AM dial. That's WNQM at 8 o'clock Saturday morning. And remember our needy. We have needy people. We try to do something very few churches do. We try to be directly involved in the needs of people who are really struggling to stay afloat in life, that are believers associated with Grace and Truth Ministries. We have a food pantry here, and if you want to bring food to the food pantry, you can bring it either here and put it up under this table up here, or you can come over to my house on Friday night when we gather together to make DVDs and or you can bring food cards or send food cards from around the country, around the world, wherever you are, and you want to send a Visa card, a Walmart card, a MasterCard. You can get them, pick them up, $25 or $50. That'll be the maximum on the card, and you can send that in, and we get that directly to these people that are in need. And remember our missionaries down in Ecuador. We take offerings for them continually because I believe in what they're doing. I want you to believe in what they're doing. They're teaching these doctrines of truth, predestination, election, sovereignty of God. They're preaching it to the natives in Ecuador. They tell them the truth about a daily cross and death to self. And these guys are doing a fantastic job of getting the message out down there in Ecuador. And you want to send some money to them, you send a check and put on the bottom of the mission fund, and I go directly to the bank, get a cashier's check, and go right back to the post office, and I drop it in the mail to them. So just help support these guys. Don't forget, I forgot to announce this morning, our chili cookout is on October the 31st of this month down here.
Monday?
Excuse me, not 31st. I'm thinking of trick-or-treat people. I'm thinking about that evil, wicked Halloween, you know. 29th of this month, down here at the park, right down the street from the church, down by the tennis courts, right here on Galveston Road in Hendersonville. And just remember and be aware of our chili cookout. It'll be a good time. Bring your chili, whatever else you want to bring, cakes, cookies, whatever. We'll find a way to devour them or consume them, all these goodies. And it's a lot of fun to have chili in the cold. And but
remember that the meat thing is empty.
The what? The meat box at our food pantry is empty. We need some. We need canned chicken, canned tuna, canned herring. Oh, there's some herring over there.
Yeah,
I saw it all ago.
They have got
That's why I said it.
They got roast beef in it.
Got roast beef in a can, okay.
And hams.
Do they have Prince Albert in a can?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted.
But we don't want any Prince
Colon cancer in a can.
Colon cancer in a can. No, when we were a teenager, you used to call the store, "Do you have Prince Albert in a can?" Well, you better open your up and lay him out. Silly kids. Prince Albert again. Prince Albert fighting tobacco. That was an advertisement back then. And everybody remembers Prince Albert, don't they? Yeah, all of us old people remember Prince Albert.
He's that singer from Minnesota.
Is he that singer from Minnesota? Yeah. Yeah. Prince Albert.
Or is he just called Prince?
Prince Albert brings to you. Something like that. And that was part of their commercial. Oh, I know what it is. Roll your own with PA and take a puff or two. You'll get that extra smoking joy Prince Albert brings to you. Remember that? You don't remember that. You have to remember that. Roll your own with PA. Oops, here I am advertising smoking. I better be quiet.
Do you know the theme to Car 54 we're already?
Huh?
Car 54 we're already.
Yeah. I remember the first jingle I ever learned. It was about 1946. And Pepsi Cola wasn't big. And we used to complain in the 40s because Coca-Cola only gave you 6 ounces and Pepsi Cola gave you gave you 12, and the jingle went to Pepsi-Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces. That's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi-Cola is the drink for you. That was the first one I remember. Twice as much for a nickel. Did you get that? And when the drinks went up to 6 cents, we all had a fit. We did. You gotta find a penny to put in the machine with it, you know. We just griping and complaining because the Coke was 6 cents. We should now. What's a Coke if you get it out of a machine? $1.50.
$1.20.
It's crazy, isn't it? Huh? Well, now that we've advertised Prince Albert and Pepsi-Cola.
We wouldn't do that. We signed contracts saying we would do that. But that's only on the regular line, not this part.
Yeah. Well, let's go, Lord, in prayer. It's Sunday night, and our subject on Sunday night is the Doctrine of Devils. We've been in this a little over 2 years, I believe, on Sunday night. And the whole idea of this is to show what devil means, or what Satan means. Devil does not mean what these people out here in the world think it means. Satan doesn't mean what people think it means. You have to go with the definition and what the Bible, you have a definition, you have a context definition. When the Bible gives you a definition of something, it will emphatically show you what that word means. You have the Greek definition if it's a New Testament word, and you have the Hebrew definition if it's an Old Testament word. And you also have another definition. You have cultural definition, depending on what the culture was of the day, what the beliefs were, what the people said of that day that something meant. But you have to go outside the Bible. I'm not talking about you go outside the Bible for truth. You go outside the Bible. You go back into the culture of that time through Jewish historians and Jewish writers who wrote on the culture of the first century. You've got all kinds of books on customs and idioms and metaphors and what things mean. I've got all kinds of books in my library on customs of the Jews in the first century, the Jewish people in the time of Jesus. I can think of dozens of books I've got in my library, and it'll go take you back and tell you what things meant during that day and time. And you have another definition that I haven't mentioned a lot, and that is definition from the Septuagint. Now, in the Septuagint, the word the Septuagint, when you see LXX, L is 50 in Roman numerals, X is 10, X is 10. So LXX is 70. And there were 70 translators of the Septuagint. You had what was called the Masoretic, M-A-S-O-R-E-T-I-C, the Masoretic text. And the Masoretic text was the Hebrew text. Masoretic means it was passed down from one generation to the next, and it was the Hebrew text. The Hebrew text is not the one that we're having problems with. Whenever I teach on the difference between the Westcott and Hort, and you'll see it written in books, W-H, or I say the difference between the Westcott and Hort and the Textus Receptus. Well, Westcott and Hort is where we get the NIV, the RSV, the New England Bible, the American Standard, and from the Textus Receptus, we get the King James. King James. And the New King James is just updating of words of the King James. But if you would just want to use a New King James just to read, that's one thing. But if you're going to use it to study by, that's not wise, not because it's a bad text, they just updated words. But when you use a New King James, what you end up with is most of your word study books are tied to the King James. Word studies is tied to the King James, and if they change the word in the New King James, you won't be able to look up the word. Most of your concordances are tied to the Textus Receptus or the King James. King James comes from the TR. So if I'm showing the difference in these, that's one thing. But whenever there's an argument over these. There's 6,500 words that are left out of the Westcott and Hort that are in the King James. And there's a lot of inversion of words. Sometimes there are prefixes left out of the Westcott and Hort that are in the Textus Receptus. The Westcott and Hort, I'll just go ahead and say this, Westcott and Hort is a false text. Mainly, well, because of several things, but my biggest complaint about the Westcott and Hort is an eclectic text. You see, L-E-C-T-I-C. Eclectic means if they had 1,000, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and count up to 1,000 copies are codices, C-O-D-E-X or C-O-D I-C-E-S, codex. These are forms of the same word here. And a codex is a copy. Now, we have copy machine over there. It will copy something exactly the way that you want to make something copy, it'll copy it exactly. They didn't have copy machines. They had copyists. C-O-P-I-E-S-T. A copyist was a man that would sit around writing these out all day long. And if he decided he didn't like something in the Westcott and Hort, or what this was actually originally the Aleph and Bayeth, and they named them after the first two letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the Codex Aleph and the Codex Bayeth. The Codex Aleph was the Vaticanus, and the Bayeth, the Codex B, or Codex A and B, copies A and B, and Codex Aleph and Bayeth. The Bayeth was the Alexandrian text, and that was found in St. Catherine's Cathedral, St. Catherine's.
Where's that?
That's in Alexandria, Egypt. And then the Vaticanus was found in the Vatican. But the Catholic Bible does not come from the Aleph and Bayeth. The Catholic Bible is a TR Bible. That's because this Aleph and Bayeth was not found and put into effect until 1881. In 1881, Mr. Westcott and Mr. Hort, who were said to be scholars, they were twisted scholars. They were Mariology. They practiced M-A-R-I-O-L-O-G-Y, Mariology. Mariology was some of the goofy, stupid, crazy Roman Catholic ideas, and they were Mariologists. Mariology is like, one story was that Mary wanted to, that this one woman that was a prostitute, and she decided to go into Roman Catholicism and be a nun. Well, she went into a convent, and while she was in the convent, she decided she wanted to go back in the world and practice her old trade of being a prostitute. So Mary comes down from heaven, and she comes down and takes her place in the convent while she goes out and does her prostitution until she gets through that, and then she comes back, and then Mary goes back to heaven. Mariology is total heathenism. And they were Mariologists, and they also had something called a ghostly guild, where they put on these plays that were very questionable, and they were like horror movies of our day and time. And they tried to sell the public that there was truth in this, and they invented history. And where can you find out these things about them? There's a man named Dean Burgeon. His name is actually John. He's was a dean of a seminary. John Burgeon, during the 1800s, Dean John Burgeon, he's a dean of a seminary, and he fought the battle in the 1800s for the Textus Receptus, and they called him the champion of lost causes because he was fighting for the TR, and it was a losing battle. Today, in the world, the Westcott and Hort is the most popular Bible through the NIV in the world. And it has all this tremendous error in it. I always like to go to John 3:16. Your NIV says, "For God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son." And that's just not true. Because the Bible says, "Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. We'll see him as he is." So we're sons of God. And then the Lord told Moses, "You go tell Pharaoh, let my son go. Israel's my son, even my firstborn." Well, he couldn't have given his one and only Son like the NIV says. It's absolutely not true. He gave his only begotten Son. Begotten means the only one taken out of God himself. So So when you get into, I'm kind of showing you a difference to bring in the Septuagint. When you get into and they had many, many more things that's wrong with this. The main thing, it was an eclectic text. 995 texts out of 1,000. And what are they doing having all of these different texts? Because when they would send a copy of Paul's letter to the Galatians, they'd sit down and write it out. And they had all these different people that were associated with the Westcott and Hort that they didn't like the idea of something, so they just changed the text. So when they came up with 995 out of every 1,000 copies of the Westcott and Hort, a codex or a manuscript is a copy. The original letter that Paul wrote, if he wrote to the Galatians, when he wrote the first letter to the Galatians, it was that first letter was called an autograph because it had Paul's signature on it, and it was from him. So that was an autograph. These others are copies, or they are manuscripts or codices. Well, when they come up with all these different copies, 995 out of every 1,000 of the Westcott and Hort disagree with each other. 995,000 out of the TR agree with each other, and the only reason the other 5 don't agree is because it's usually because of clerical error and not because of a theological difference that they have to say. In fact, when you get into Westcott and Hort in Mark 16, the last 12 verses, starting in verse 9 up to 20, when you get into the last 12 verses of Mark is not in the Westcott and Hort text. It's not in the NIV. You say, I've seen it in NIV, it's there. They have a disclaimer on it right before Mark 9. They say this is from an ancient text and it's not a reliable text. It's a disclaimer in every one of the Westcott and Hort Bibles, particularly in the NIV, which is the most popular Bible in the world. And then you have Luke 7:53 through 8:11.
John 7:53.
Oh, did I say? Yeah, John 7, excuse me. John 7:53 through 8:11. That's about the woman taken in adultery and brought to Jesus and they want to stone her. That's not in the Westcott and Hort. There's a disclaimer on it. They put it in there, but there's a disclaimer on it. And you have 1 John 5 and 7. 1 John 5 and 7. And that's not in a Westcott and Hort either, and that verifies the Trinity right there. And me and the Westcott and Hort people are not going to get along at all. I do not believe in an NIV Bible. It's not true. It's an absolute lie. It's because of the text. And what they did with the Westcott and Hort, what makes it worse than anything else, it's eclectic. They would go through, they'd have the so-called scholars, as they were correlating this, Mr. Westcott and Hort, they'd have their scholars go through and they'd say, well, in this John 3:16, we like this verse here, the way it says it in this codex, better than this verse, than this manuscript over here. So we're going to go with this one. Now, when we get over here to Book of Acts, over in the 2nd chapter and verse 2, we like this over here instead of this one here. So we're going to go with this one. What they did is they picked and chose the verses that they wanted out of the different texts, out of the different manuscripts. Who can do that? Who can say is the proper verse other than God? The Textus Receptus is one continual that stayed with us all through these years. But the main thing that's wrong with the Westcott and Hort over this is from the early church, particularly from the late 4th century, which is the oldest manuscripts we can find of Textus Receptus because they kept wearing them out. From that time until 1881, the only text that was used was what we call the AV, the Authorized Version, which was the Textus Receptus. That's what was called the Authorized Version. What they're trying to tell us, Mr. Westcott and Hort, the people that came up with the NIV, the Revised Standard Version, the American Standard, they're trying to tell us that God's Word was hidden from the world until 1881, and we didn't actually have the Word of God until 1881. Do you actually believe God doesn't know how to preserve His Word? We had the Textus Receptus, or the authorized version. We had that. They're telling us for 1,600 years, they say that we did not have a correct Bible. Now, the reason most of the scholars will go with the Westcott and Hort over the Textus Receptus, and I'm amazed at them why they do it. What they do is the Westcott and Hort, which is the NIV, mainly, American Standard, and Revised Standard Version. All that comes from this, New England Bible. Most of your new Bibles come from this Westcott and Hort. The reason they accept this is because these are the oldest manuscripts that we can find. Well, why would they be older than the Textus Receptus, which is the King James Bible comes from? Why would they be older and be false? I didn't say the autograph wasn't older. I didn't say the autograph of the TR wasn't older. I'm saying the manuscripts that they could find of the Westcott and Hort went back to around 325 A.D. The manuscripts in the Textus Receptus go back to somewhere around 375 A.D. Well, how do you prove the Textus Receptus is older, that it precedes the Westcott and Hort? All you have to do is go to the early church fathers. Early church fathers. And we're talking about Irenaeus. We're talking about 1st and 2nd and 3rd century. Irenaeus, Polycarp. We're talking about Ignatius. Cyprian, to Tertullian. Now, I want you to notice something. Even though I'm going to quote these guys, these are men of the 1st and 2nd century. Now, most people will not quote these people because the Roman Catholics picked these early fathers of the church. These were called popes. Pope doesn't mean Roman Catholic Pope. Pope means Papa or Father. These were the fathers of the early church, but the Roman Catholics picked them up, canonized them. Not two N's, one N. Canon, to C-A-N-N, that means you put them in a cannon and shoot them somewhere. Canonized them. To canonize someone means to make him a saint. So they took all of these men, made them Roman Catholic saints instead, and I'm not saying everything that all of them said was true. Irenaeus was very reliable. Polycarp was very reliable. Ignatius. Cyprian would get off base. Tertullian would go somewhere off out in space. But that doesn't matter. If you can find these church fathers quoting these verses somewhere before the oldest manuscripts, if you can go back before these Westcott and Hort manuscripts and go back to the 1st and 2nd century and 3rd century, this is the 4th century here. The 4th century is from 300 A.D. to 400 A.D. That's the 400 years, isn't it? Right there. That's the 4th century. If you can find from 0 to 1, 1 to 200, 200 to 300, if you can find these early church fathers and more quoting any of these verses right here if you can find them quoting them in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, that shows you that this is the oldest text. Now, why wouldn't you have why wouldn't you have Textus Receptus manuscripts as old as these? The Textus Receptus were being printed on that papyri. And those papyri, that was so flimsy, that paper, they were wearing them out. They constantly wore out these papyri so they would not be able, like Mr. Dean Burgeon said, he says they weren't holding up with all the use, and the only oldest manuscripts we can find is somewhere at the end of the 4th century, but you can predate these manuscripts by going back prior to these men and finding these verses. And can you do that? Yes. There's a set of books. It's a 38-volume set. I have them in my library. The first 10 volumes, first 10 volumes is called the Ante-Nicene Fathers. And then during the time period of the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, that's when Constantine started the Roman Catholic Church and brought the Feast of Saturn into the church and renamed it Christ's Mass. So those during that Nicene period were called the Nicene Fathers, and after that period they were called post-Nicene Fathers. You can, from Christian book distributors, you can order the first 10 volumes on the Ante-Nicene Fathers. You can get those. There's an index volume in that. In that index volume, you can look up these verses, and they're quoted by these men here. So anything that's quoted before that time period, before 325, from the oldest of in that neighborhood is where the Westcott And Hort text was. They've discovered the age of it. If you can find anything quoted before that, in that, quoted by these men, it doesn't even matter Mr. Tertullian was kind of off the wall on some of his beliefs. If he is quoting these verses, and they lived in the 1st and 2nd, 3rd century, Polycarp was a direct convert of John after he came off the Isle of Patmos. You can find these men quoting these verses. Now, why A.T. Robertson didn't bother to look into that? He was one of the great scholars of the last century. Of the 1800s. I don't know. Why G. Gresham Machen, who died in the mid-1900s, didn't look into the church fathers? I don't know why they didn't. The only thing I come up with, I've talked to some people about it, perhaps it wasn't as crucial in the 1800s when Mr. Westcott and Mr. Hort came up with this. Even Mr. Hort made the statement. He says, and Mr. Dean Burgeon quotes him as saying, he said, if they find out what that we have done, they will crucify us. We found out now, but the world doesn't care what they've done. They like the NIV because it reads easier. Well, it's wrong. And it's a false text. And I didn't mean to go into the Westcott And Hort, but I need to bring this up once in a while so you'll know what it's about. And I suggest that if you can get the Dean Burgeon's set of books, it's called Unholy Hands on the Bible. Mr. Burgeon's book is called Unholy Hands on the Bible. It's a 2-volume set. He goes in there and nails these guys. In fact, Psalms, the 12th chapter says God's word will be here in every generation, yet they're saying it wasn't here for 1,600 years. They're telling us that we did not have the proper Bible in the world until Mr. Westcott and Mr. Hort came up with it in 1881. Do I believe that? No. Don't care who says it. I don't believe it. Don't care what professor and what seminary says that. Learn that you can think for yourself. It don't matter what these authorities say, these experts. The worst thing about it, it's an eclectic text, and they picked and chose what verses they said properly express the true Word of God. Now, I said that to say there's one other translation. We've never had this controversy over the Old Testament text. Never have had that. Not this kind of a controversy. This is a battle to the finish. This thing on the Westcott And Hort and the Textus Receptus. Have you ever been in a church and some preacher's reading from a NIV, and all of a sudden he just goes somewhere you have no idea where he went? You're in a King James, you're going, where'd he go? What happened? He's got a different text than you've got. Has that happened to anybody?
Yep.
Yeah. And he's reading and he just goes, you're going, what happened? Where is he? That will happen when somebody's reading a Westcott And Hort and you've got a King James in front of you. You won't have any idea where they went. Now, I said that to say we're talking about demons. The definition of a demon, we've given you the definition. There's a Septuagint definition. We haven't had the confusion about the Masoretic text. Masoretic text. Masoretic text is merely the Hebrew Old Testament text. You don't have two or three of them. You got a Hebrew text that's been passed down from generation to generation. When you get to 332, 330 BC, a man comes on the scene named Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was truly the greatest military strategist that ever lived up to that point. He was a true conqueror. He would take small numbers of men and actually just conquer entire armies. And he was an overwhelming conqueror. I noticed that movie, The 300, came on the other night. It was about Sparta. I've done some study on the Spartans. They were born, bred, and built to fight. And they mentioned the phalanx on there. The phalanx. The phalanx was they were talking about how they kept their shields together. They kept their shields and they formed themselves into a big square, and they had their spears sticking out. Anybody that ran into them, they shifted. If they came from this side, they'd shift their spears here. And if one man fell out here, this man would step up behind him and take his place if he was killed. And they had the shields up, and they had them aligned together, and they were a fighting machine. And they would take this phalanx, and when Alexander the Great became this great, mighty general, they would march this phalanx. And this is how the Spartans fought. They fought and were so effective because they had these shields just one right after another lined up like that in the phalanx. And they was talking about this in the 300. The 300 is about how the Spartans were just great fighters. They were the best fighters in history. And they had this phalanx also, and they were talking about the phalanx in that movie. It was very interesting to me because I have an interest in those kind of things. And so when they're attacked from here, they would take that, and they were so disciplined, they would take that phalanx and they would move it sideways, and then they'd straighten it back out this way. And they would, when they gave the order, they would march that way. When you're marching in rank, I went to military school, and you say to the right, oblique march, he'd give them something like that oblique movement, and the whole thing would shift and turn that way. And they would actually just march into Cyrus or into Xerxes' army, the Persian army, and just be slaughtering as they walked. This is the same way that the Spartans fought in the movie The 300. Of course, they didn't look nearly as flashy as they do in that movie. Like, we got all these rippling abs, you know. They had all these super bodybuilders playing the soldiers, you know. But Alex the Great comes on the scene, and he brings in all of the glossa and dialectos. He brings in all the foreign languages. Foreign languages, glossa. We get our word glossary from that. Glossary. Then he brings in all the dialects of the Koine. Koine is the word common. It's the word common. And they had a common street Greek language. In every city-state, and those languages would differ as much as Spanish and Italian in our day and time. Spanish and Italian both being a Latin language, they differ that much. And when the Bible says they all spoke with other tongues is the word heteroglossa. Heteroglossa, there in Acts 2. These were Jews from every nation under heaven. They had been scattered, and Alexander the Great had given all of the world its glossa and its dialects of the Greek language. When they said, how hear we every man in our own tongue when we were born, there in the 2nd chapter of Acts, the word tongue is dialect. They were hearing in the dialect where the people were born, and these were Jews from every nation under heaven coming back from all over the world. And that decree was given by God in Exodus, the 23rd chapter, that all the males had to come back from all over the world where they had been scattered. In 586 BC, southern Judah was scattered. And in 722 BC, northern Israel was scattered. So they're all coming back from all over the world, making their trip over here to Jerusalem. And they're all speaking these different languages when they get there, and they've got these 3 feasts they all got to come to, and they can't understand one another. So God says, I'm going to straighten this out in your ears. How hear we every man in our own dialect when we were born? So when Alexander the Great gives all of the world all these glossa and dialects during his reign, somewhere between 332 and 320, when he was assassinated by one of his generals. You mean he did that all in those few years? Well, to a degree. The Grecian Empire had been forming for 500 years prior to the fact when he became this great general. His father was Philip of Macedon, and Philip, more or less, he was the architect of this great army, and Alexander the Great went out and executed his work. Well, the fact that all of these glossa and dialects, most of the world by 200 BC was speaking, most of the civilized world was speaking Greek. One of the dialects of the Koine. The tongues thing, of course, we know is not true. It's dialects in glossa. And these were Jews from every nation under heaven. They'd been scattered there because of their apostasy for 500 years, from Saul, their first king, to Zedekiah, their last king. So God scatters them, but while they're being scattered, Alexander the Great comes along. In 200 BC, the Masoretes, or the Jewish scholars, who were caretakers of the Masoretic text, said we need to take the Hebrew text, since there's so many people in the world speaking Greek, and we need to translate the Hebrew text into Greek. And they came up with 70 of the best scholars they could find. 70 scholars that knew Hebrew and Greek. And they translated the Hebrew Bible. When you look at the Old Testament and where's my interlinear Bible? There it is. When you look at the Hebrew text, the square letters of the Old Testament, they took those square letters right there and they translated them into Greek. Right there, it reads from right to left. They took that and translated it to Greek. When they did this more exact than any other translation that's ever been made. Even all of the best scholars will tell you that the Septuagint is the best. The LXX, the Septuagint, is the nearest as they can get to an exact translation. The nearest exactness, I don't want to say exact, but the nearest or most correct translation, even more so than the Greek New Testament, into English, because you can't translate Greek into English. So this Septuagint was the best translation that they could come up with. So when they translated this, you remember I said that when they translated this, one of the words for demon, or they had many things that they called demons. We've been talking about demons. One of the things they said a demon was a familiar spirit. Now that's a peculiar word, familiar. What does that mean, familiar spirit? Well, it don't mean anything unless you go back to the original text. If you go to the Hebrew text before the Septuagint, in the Hebrew text, the word familiar spirit that they put into English, this is English, the original word in the Hebrew is the word ob, O-W-B. Now this was the original word in the Hebrew text. In this text before they translated to the Septuagint. These scholars that translated the Septuagint, they were brilliant. You can't even find complaints among the best liberal or conservative scholars like you can between the Westcott and Hort and the Textus Receptus. That's a war there. That's a never-ending war till Jesus comes. In fact, as far as the world's concerned, the Westcott and Hort is winning because they sell more NIVs than any other Bible in the world. Now, so the nearest to a translation, which really you don't even have complaints by liberals or conservatives from either side. So when they translated this word, familiar spirit, in the Hebrew it meant bottle. Well, that sure sounds strange. A person doesn't know what a bottle was. Well, you have to study peeping and muttering. Peeping and muttering was the sound they made when they pretended to talk to the dead in a bottle. What was a bottle? Was it something that looked like this? Was that it? Looked like something that genie went down inside of? No, that wasn't it. It was a goat. It was the stomach of a goat. They would cut the stomach out of a goat and they would sew up the bottom end. They would dry it out. They would put a cork in this end, put a strap on it, and wear it around their neck. That was a bottle. And you've seen people wearing that. You've seen pictures of them in the Middle East, and they're going along with this, looked like a leather bag around their back. Well, it was a bottle. That's a very arid land. They didn't have water easily available to them, so they had the bottle. And they would take that stopper out of that top end, and if they were a soothsayer or a necromancer, necromancy is talking to the dead. Necro is the word dead. Remember over in Colossians 3 and 5, we are to mortify the deeds of the flesh. Mortify is the word necro. Okay, R-O-O. It means to kill off the deeds of our flesh. Necromancy is talking to the dead. Now, are these people actually talking to the dead? No. Are they pretending to talk to the dead? Yes. Why? For money. And they were called diviners. Diviners. And they would pull that cork off the bottle and they would peep and mutter, and they would go and consult what in this is amazing. I catch these things in these movies. In this 300, in the movie The 300, they went to the oracle to consult with the oracle. Oracle is just one who's a giver of the law. Remember in the Matrix, they went to talk to the oracle to see what was going to be the future and see what was going to happen. Well, all that goes back to the same system. They would go and talk to the Chaldeans, to the magicians. Magician comes from the word M-A-G-G-I or M-A-G-G-O-S, magos. This was wise men. When the wise men came to Jesus, they came from Babylon. And when they came from Babylon, some of them believed truth and some of them did not believe truth. Remember, Abraham was raised over in this area and he had some of his ancient family that believed truth. When they were reading the stars, these were people that believed the truth, those wise men that came.
Jim, excuse me to cut you off, but when people go to visit people at the gravesite and they talking to them at the grave, is that the same thing?
Well, they'll say, my mother is watching over me. Your mother's not doing nothing. She's either in heaven or hell, one of the two. The Jehovah's Witnesses say that after you're dead, and you don't know anything about earth, and that you don't know anything that's going on, and they use the verse out of Ecclesiastes. Go to Ecclesiastes. And they say this verse is talking about when you're dead, you don't know anything, so therefore you must be annihilated. And they use this verse here. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Every time you find someone consulting the Chaldeans and the magicians, who was it Pharaoh consulted and brought before him to confront Moses? The magicians of Egypt. And whenever Joseph was sold into Egypt, and when he was in prison, and the Pharaoh had his dream, who did the Pharaoh call to come and read his dreams and to interpret his dreams? His magicians, his Chaldeans, his magic men. He called David Copperfield and some of those guys in. See, they taught that magic, they learned sleight of hand, and they taught that it was that made them gods, and they learned to trick people, and they sold themselves as gods, and they charged money for it. They'd say, cross my palm, I'll tell you your future. This doesn't go just down here on Gallatin Road, downtown Nashville. It went on in the ancient world, and they would consult these people. And here in, where was I going? Oh yeah, 9. I just lost my place. 9. In chapter 9, this is the verse that the Jehovah's Witnesses use. Verse 5, for the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. So the Jehovah's Witnesses say they don't know anything after they're dead. They don't know anything about being dead after they're dead. So therefore they must not be in hell, they must not be in heaven. That's not the context of this. You have to go back to the previous chapter in verse 16 of chapter 8. When I applied mine heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done upon the earth. Notice these phrases. Business upon the earth. Business upon the earth. When I have set my heart to know what's upon the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night seeth sleep with his eyes. Then I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. Done under the sun. Where does the sun shine? On the earth, upon the earth. He's using two different phrases that have the same meaning. upon the earth under the sun. Then I beheld all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work of God that is done under the sun. Done under the sun. The things that are done upon the earth. Because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. His ways are past finding out. You can't figure out God. You believe Him when He says something, you believe Him. And that's talking about everything that's going on is the work of God under the sun, because He works all things after the counsel of His own will, doesn't He? And you try to figure that out, you're not going to. Yea, farther, though a wise man think to know it, think to know what? What is done under the sun by God. Right? Yet shall he not be able to find it. Now remember, CHAPTER 9 is not in the text. 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not in there. This was one rolled up scroll, is what it was. For all this, for is a conjunction. It's a subordinate conjunction referring back to the things that's been said. Isn't that what it is? For all this, all of what? Considering what God has done under the sun upon the earth, all this I considered in my heart, even to declare all this, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God here under the sun. Because when you leave here, you're not going to do any works of God, are you? It's done. No man knoweth either love or hatred by all that is before them. All things come alike to all. Everything that comes alike. There's not a whole lot of difference in what's coming to us upon the earth under the sun. There is one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to good and the clean, and to the unclean, to him that sacrificeth and to him that sacrificeth not, as is good, so is the sinner, and he that sweareth as he that feareth an oath. He's saying there's one thing to all these men. What do you think that might be? Death. All men are going to die, righteous and unrighteous, the one that swears, the one that doesn't swear. Matters not who he is, clean and unclean. They're all going to die. This is an evil among all things that are done under the sun, where the sun shines. That there is one event unto all, yea, also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live, after they go to the dead. After that, they go to the dead. So, what's in their heart while they live is manifest by what they do. For to him that is joined to all the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion under the sun. A living dog can do something, get it done, but a lion can't devour anyone when it's dead. He's talking about living and dying under the sun, and the things that are not under the sun are either in heaven or in hell. Then he says, for the living know that they shall die under the sun upon the earth. But the dead, after they are dead, know nothing. They know not anything that's going on under the sun, because they're dead. Neither have they any more a reward under the sun, for the memory of them is forgotten, and it's over with, and it's done. I've said there's so many famous people that have lived in the past 50 years that most of the young people today don't even know who they are, and they were world famous 40 years ago. And you don't even know them, and they're dead, and they're forgotten. The whole point of this is, while you're alive, do what you can do under the sun, because when you're dead, you can't do nothing. And it's talking about here that the dead don't know anything that's going on under the sun. It's not talking about they don't know they're in hell, because the rich man died and in hell he lifted up his eyes. Now, nobody's looking back down upon you while you're in a World Series baseball playoff game saying, my father's watching over me. No, he's not. He knows nothing that's going on under the sun.
Jim,
He's not an angel.
Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's all-time hit record.
And
And when
he
he hit first base, they stopped the action, and the umpire, and Pete started crying, and he goes, I do this for my dad. And the first base umpire goes, your dad's watching it, because his dad was dead. And Pete goes, no, my dad's dead.
Your dad's watching. Pete Rose said, my dad's dead. Huh? That's funny.
He's dead.
Well, at least Pete Rose knew that his dad wasn't watching forever. Anybody who said, in Michael Landon, when he died, he said, told his wife, I'll be an angel watching over you. I'll be a guardian angel. A guardian angel is a demon. You're already a demon, Michael. I'll be a guardian angel. I'll be watching over you. No, you won't. You're going to hell, Michael. You're not going anywhere but there. Well, how do you know Michael Landon went to hell? Well, I never heard him talk about a daily cross and death to self and self-denial and predestination and suffering for righteousness' sake and affliction and persecution. Did you? And if it's in his heart, it'd come out his mouth. You're judging. I'm to judge righteous judgment.
I had dinner last night with a 22-year-old girl, a bunch of people at a table. And she was well educated from Texas. And she was 21, she had no idea who Rod Stewart was or the Beatles.
22 years old and had no idea who Rod Stewart was and the Beatles. No idea. They're forgotten. You can, no, there's people right here that don't know. There's people right here that don't know famous people. We've done this many times.
They're still alive, half of them anyway.
Yeah, I know.
Rod's alive.
I've seen people said they didn't know who somebody famous was. The kids today, when you get out of your element, I was in real estate for years. Probably, other than Hank Williams, the most famous country singer that's ever lived was George Jones. And you never heard of George Jones? That's amazing, see. He's the most famous. Even the Rolling Stones said he had one of the greatest voices they had ever heard. He was the most unusual voice I've ever heard, and you can hear him in the dark 10 miles away with mufflers on your ears, and you can recognize him. He is the most astounding sound. And I was in real estate. When you get out of your element, you're not famous anymore. You get out of your element. And I'd mentioned George Jones, that I was in high school in Beaumont when he's a disc jockey down there, and how bad a disc jockey was. And we used to say, George thinks he's going to be famous someday. And we'd make fun of him. We showed him, didn't we? But I'd mention George from time to time, and the broker one day said, "Who is this George Smith you're always talking about?"
George Smith.
Yeah, George Smith.
George Possum.
So what I'm saying, nobody's going to be knowing somebody, and you're not going to be an angel. If you're a guardian angel, you're a demon. But you're already a demon. And you do know who Michael Landon is, don't you? Okay, just in case you didn't know. I've been shocked and surprised at how people have forgotten. They don't know people, don't know famous people. I've had a young black guy come here one time, and I said, well, you know, people get forgotten. I said, you know, the fifth dimension is kind of, they're forgotten. He said, who's that? I said, you're a black man, you don't know the fifth dimension? And you played drums in a band? He said, I ain't never heard of them. I said, the fifth dimension would fill up the Coliseum by themselves in 1970, and they were one of the most famous groups in the world. He said, never heard of them. Huh? Yeah. Well, that wasn't all. A whole bunch of slews of hits, Up, Up and Away, and One Less Bell to Answer, and all this stuff. And they were this great, huge group. And most young people don't even know who they are. That's how quick your fame is gone. It's over with quick. That's why it says they're forgotten. So the work that you do under the sun, it's very shortly lived. I'm shocked at how people that hadn't heard of certain things. Fame is fleeting. That's not what we're to be seeking. Well, let's continue reading here. For the living know that they shall die. They know that. But the dead know nothing about what's going on under the sun. Neither have they any more a reward. So the Jehovah's Witnesses use this to say when you die, you burn up in hell, and you just go to ashes, and you don't know anything after you're dead. This is talking about you don't know anything about the earth under the sun when you're dead. That's what it's talking about. Also, their love and their hatred and their envy is now perished when they're dead. That's the common thing that happens to all men. Neither have they any more a portion forever in anything that is done on the earth under the sun. You better do what you can while you're alive, because you don't have a second chance. You go one time around, that's it. Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. Let thy garments be always white, and let thy head lack no ointment. Live joyfully with the wife, whom thou lovest all the days of the life of thy vanity, all the days of thy worthlessness. Hebel is the word. Which he hath given thee under the sun upon the earth, all the days of thy vanity, for that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. He's talking about what's under the sun as opposed after death. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do under the sun, do it with thy might. Do it with everything you have as a believer. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave after you're dead. You don't have any wisdom what's going on under the sun upon the earth, whither thou goest. And he said, I returned and saw under the sun the things that's going on the earth. The race is not to the swift. It's not the fastest man that's going to win. Nor the battle to the strong. It's not the strongest man that'll win in the battle. Goliath was certainly stronger than David, and David wasn't going to have a wrestling match with him, because Goliath would have pinned him and he would have tapped out real quick, wouldn't he? But he was better with a sling than Goliath was with a sword, and he could stand a long distance from him and hit him right between the eyes with that, because he had practiced it every day for years. Neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill under the sun. What's going to happen is what God wants to happen, but time and chance happeneth to them all. And chance doesn't mean accident. Chance is the word pagal. It means intercession. Intercession means to impinge progress and cause to go another direction. If the tortoise wins, it'll be because God put laziness in the mind of the hare. Isn't that right? And that's exactly what will happen. God says it's not how fast you are, how strong you are. For man also knoweth not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in a snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it falleth suddenly upon them. Watch out how you live. Death will fall fast and quick. This wisdom have I seen also under the sun, upon the earth, where the sun shines. And it seemed great unto me. There was a little city, and few men within it. And there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built a great bulwark against it. Now there was found in this city a poor wise man. And he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no man remembered that same poor man. God will remember him, but man don't remember him. All the great things that you do, don't expect man to applaud you and give you accolades for it. They will not. Not unless you're a part of their team, playing their game with their ball in their ballpark. Unless you are compromising, they will not remember you. Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Being smart is better than being strong. I went to the prison out here. I used to go out there and teach. And some of these guys, all they could do all day long was lift weights. Some of them were built like houses. I mean, some of them were humongous. I've never seen bigger men than I've seen out there at the prison. One great big black fellow, about 6'4". He'd come up and he was just rippling. Just good night. And he wrapped his arms around me. It was like steel. He said, Jim, I love you. I love this message. I'm thinking, please don't squeeze me at all. It's like, I mean, arms of steel were wrapping around me. I thought, man, this is unbelievable. And he respected me because I had something to say. He came up to me one day and he looked down and he said, Jim, I don't have just this humble guy. You say, but he was a criminal. So are you. You hadn't been caught, that's right. He looked down at me and said, I don't have any player to play these tapes here. You take them back. I said, I'm going to get you a player. You keep them. And I somehow got one in there. I wasn't supposed to send them. I got a company to send him one. And I would go down and sit in Unit 4 with some of them. I'd say, guys, come here. And boy, these guys would gather around me and just giants around me. And they could have picked me up and just broken me in half. But you know what they loved was the wisdom. It wasn't their own strength that they had this regard for. And I treated them like humans. I'd sit down in the middle of them and say, come here, guys, gather around. I'm going to show you something. It's a paper I've written here on demons. I'm going to show you this. And they go, just kind of get over me like little kids. And I'd preach in the chapel on Friday nights. And I'd get me a great big piece of paper, big white piece of paper, and tape it up on the wall, and I'd write these Greek words up there. And one night after the class, a whole bunch of them come down there, and they had to lean over me and reach down, and they were hugging me and telling me how much they loved me. And they could have destroyed me. But they loved the wisdom, not their own physical strength. And the guy that got me out there, his name was Cliff Schuler. He's a white guy, and he had tattoos around his neck. He had a chain of skulls tattooed around his neck, and he was tattooed from there to the ground. And his eyes were pulled back like this. And he's a big, heavy, barrel-chested guy about that thick. Didn't have a belly on him, just a big, solid man. And I looked at it, and I went into the prison the first night. And I said, and I asked this guy named Jeremy, I said, is there a fellow named Cliff Schuler here? And I had been looking at Cliff before, and I thought, gosh, what a scary guy. He was bald. He was bald, and his head came down straight to his shoulders. He had a neck that big. It's just like, boom, like that. And I said, what's your name? He said, Jeremy, a little guy, not much bigger than me. I said, is there Cliff Schuler here? And he said, it's that guy right there. And I went, golly, I got to go talk to him. I mean, he was a gigantic, about 6'4", about 275, and just solid as built like just a rock. And I went up to him, and he was so gentle. And Jeremy had told me, he said in another prison, he used to stand at the door of the chapel where they'd go into and tell all the guys, if you go in there and listen to this guy, I'll kill you when you come out. That's something to say. And I'm thinking, oh man. But Cliff was just as gentle, and he was strong. He was a huge man. And he was the one that was sitting on the front of his seat one night, and I said, if you can hear this, God has given you ears to hear, and he put you in prison so you can hear this. And Cliff just sat up on the front of his seat. He said, I can hear, and big old tears just run down his cheeks. This big, tough-looking guy. He said, I can hear. That's what he's talking about. He's saying, words of a wise man, wisdom is better than strength. When you're wise in the word, you can actually lead men in the direction they should go. And men will respect wisdom over strength. Believe me, they will.
The irony is, the more wisdom, the more grief.
That's right. That's true. Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of a wise man are heard in quiet more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. I like that. The wisdom of a wise man is heard in quiet places more than the cry of some king or some head of a company that's he's ruling among a bunch of fools like himself. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. One sinner destroyeth much good. Now, let's get back to where I was talking about. When you're talking about this, the Septuagint. We're talking about this Septuagint, and we're talking about this word, the demon, the obe, the bottle. They mastered ventriloquism. But they mastered ventriloquism, and they called it peeping and muttering. It was a high-pitched sound they would make, and they would pretend to be talking to the dead in this bottle. And they were selling this information from their dead ancestors, and it was their dead ancestors. Remember, demons were ancestor worship, which they had deified into gods, right? Into gods. So they would peep and mutter into that bottle, and anyone who was going to go into, we're still talking about Septuagint, anyone who was going to go into war, build a house, do any kind of endeavor, they would consult those who would peep and mutter and get advice from their ancestors. Should I build this house? Go out to the grave and talk to your mother. I've been thinking about taking this journey. Actually, people will do that. Benny Hinn says he went out to the grave of Catherine Kuhlman, and her spirit got all over him, and that's why he starts slaying in the spirit, because Catherine Kuhlman is the person who started that, and the woman was wicked. I don't know if you ever watched her. Go on the internet and look her up. She is a wicked woman, godless woman. She held these big super crusades in the 60s, and she'd get out there, and she had sleeves on her dress this long. She'd wave in the breeze. She looked like one of those, I keep saying she looked like Barbara Steele. You probably don't know who Barbara Steele is. Barbara Steele played the wicked woman. She was this beautiful young woman in the 50s in these black and white B movies. She'd come walking down a staircase and give you that, that wild-eyed look, like she's half dead or something. Well, that's what Catherine Kuhlman looked like. She'd say, "Praise God. I just love the Lord. Don't you love God?" That's what slapped that woman. If you ever seen her, she is a case. And she started this. She'd touch people and they'd fall down. Benny Hinn honed that thing to a real precise talent. He zaps people and they fall down backwards, fall on the floor, wrapped out, waves at the audience, they fall down by the hundreds. That is nothing but that's giving yourself in to subliminal thinking. That's what it is. He expects you to go down, so you expect to go down for him, so he won't be embarrassed. And you cooperate with the spokesman on the stage. Well, when these people that did the Septuagint, when they translated the word obe, which means bottle, they translated it in gastromuthos, E-N. They translated into the Greek Septuagint, out of the Hebrew. When they translated the word obe, they translated E-N-G-A-S-T-R-O-M-U-T-H-O-S. Of course, we see the word gastrointestinal, or disorders. That word's used commonly among doctors or people who, the guy that is my intestinal doctor, I've got a hiatal hernia, he'll use that word gastro on his writings. Gastro is the word stomach. Stomach. And the word in, the Greek word in, this is the translation into the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament Hebrew text. In gastro, en, we know what that Greek word means. It means within or inside of. Remember, Jesus commanded them to be baptized, or Peter commanded them to be baptized in or within. Well, in, gastro means stomach, in means within, and muthos is the word myth. It means a myth in the stomach. That's what, now notice, these are men in 200 BC translating the word familiar spirit. Actually, not the word familiar spirit, it's the word bottle. But you're going to have to know something about their beliefs about ventriloquism. You're going to have to know their beliefs about bottles. And remember, you catch a genie in a bottle, don't you? You get 3 wishes from a genie. All that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And genies were the same things Jews called demons, and the Arabs called them genies. And it was the bottle. And of course, a vampire was also a demon. And a vampire, they said you had to catch him in a bottle. So this was nothing but ancestor worship, and a vampire was an ancestor that came down to reanimate a body. Is that true? Well, no. You can watch those old vampire movies. They're a fairy tale. Of course, fairies were demons, so that's exactly what they were. So, the point I'm getting at, in 200 BC, who would know better what a demon was than the Septuagint? Who would know better what a bottle meant other than the men who translated the Septuagint? They lived long enough ago. They were authorities on Hebrew and Greek. So when they translated the word demon from the Septuagint, you've got a lot of verses that talk about demons in the Septuagint. Willie's helped me do some research on this. I asked him to do this for me. Let me give you some of these. Look over here in Leviticus 19. Now, we've said that demon is the word, our word demon is the word D-A-I-M-O-N-I-O-N. That's our word demon. Let me erase this. It's our word demon. It comes from the root dio. Now, why were these people having their ancestors read? Well, let me give you one other thing before I get into this. This peeping and muttering. Let me go over here to, before I forget, go to Isaiah the 10th chapter. Isaiah 10. Isaiah 10, I'll read this and we'll get on with it here. Isaiah 10. This is where the Assyrians came in and attacked northern Israel in 722 BC. This is Isaiah writing about this happening. And he's talking about Samaria is northern Israel. In this 10th chapter, and he's talking here in verse 12. Wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. For he saith, by the strength of my hand I have done it. I have destroyed Jerusalem and Israel. Remember, Assyrian and Babylonians were interchangeable in name. This is actually talking about the Babylonian king that comes in and destroys southern Judah. He said, it's by the strength of my hand I have done it. It was my strength that helped me destroy Israel in southern Judah. And by my wisdom, for I am prudent. I look out for my own interest. I have removed the bounds of the people. What does he mean by that? Well, their boundary lines were inside of Israel, and he's moved them over into Assyria and Babylon. So he's saying, I removed their bounds over here, and now I own their boundary lines. And have robbed their treasures, and have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. I've destroyed Israel, and my hand hath found as a nest of riches of the people, and one gathereth eggs that are left, have I gathered all the earth, and there was none that moved the wing, or opened the mouth, or peeped. They didn't peep or mutter. The king is saying, when I came in suddenly. The Bible says when a man stiffens his neck, he'll be suddenly cut off, and that without remedy in Proverbs 29:1. When Israel stiffened her neck, they didn't even have time to go and consult a Chaldean or a magician to peep and mutter and say, is this going to be war here? And all of a sudden they're hit and they're struck by the king. He said they didn't even have time to go to their necromancers to talk to the bottle. Nowadays we call it a crystal ball. It's more or less the same thing. They didn't have the time to go peep and mutter. And then God says, shall the axe boast itself against him that heweth therewith? You were nothing but the axe, and I was the axe holder. Mr. King, you think you did this to Israel? I caused you to do this, and I'll destroy you when I'm through with you. And shall the saw magnify itself against him that shaketh it? I am the woodsman, you are nothing but the saw, Mr. Assyrian. As if the rod should shake itself against him that lifts it up, can the rod or can the axe raise itself up against the woodsman or against the lumberjack and say, I'm cutting this tree down? He says, not without my hand, you're not. Or as if a staff could lift up itself, as if it were not a piece of dead wood. He's saying, you are nothing but a piece of dead wood, and I used you to cut Israel down. And I used you so quickly that they could not go and peep and mutter and find their Chaldeans to talk to the bottle. Now go back over here to Leviticus 19. If anyone should know how to translate Hebrew into Greek, it should be these experts on Hebrew and Greek in 200 BC, 200 years before Jesus came. They should know, shouldn't they? And Alexander the Great had given the world all of these glossa, all these foreign language and dialects 100 years before this, or 120 years before this. Look here in Leviticus 19. So in the Septuagint, these are some of the words in the Septuagint. We're going to read it in the King James Bible, and then we're going to go to the text for a particular word. Here in Leviticus 19 and verse 4. Well, let's read down to it. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say unto them, ye shall be holy, for I am the Lord your God, am holy. Ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Turn ye not unto daemonion. The word idols is the word demon. He's saying to Israel, don't turn to these gods of these pagans. They knew what an idol was. It was a demon or daemonion. These are the writers of 200 BC that's translating the Septuagint. Turn ye not unto demons or idols of the pagans, nor make to yourselves molten gods. I am the Lord your God. Look over here in Leviticus 26. If anyone should know what a demon was, it would be these men prior to the time of Christ, 200 years BC, during the time they're translating the Septuagint from the original Hebrew text. They're translating it to Greek because you have so many Greek-speaking people in the world. Leviticus 26 and verse 1. You shall make you no idols, no, the word is E-L-I-Y-L, same word as in Leviticus 19 and 4, E-L-I-Y-L. They took that word E-L-I-Y-L and translated D-A-I-M-O-N-I-O-N. That's our word demon. Our word demon. If there's such a thing as demons, then these idol gods are alive. And they're not. When you go into First Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 16. We're talking about one of the most reliable translations that's ever been done by some of the greatest scholars that have lived during that time. And they were experts in the Greek language and in the Hebrew language, and they knew the equivalent from the Hebrew to the Greek. And here in 1 Chronicles 16 and verse 26. For all the gods of the people. Now, how many gods are there? One. I believe there's one God that doeth well. There's no God beside me, God says. All the gods of the pagan peoples are daimonion. They are demons. All the gods of the pagan people are demons. How can gods be demons and then demons be something that gets inside of you unless there's another God? If there's such a thing as a demon that gets inside of you, then a God got inside of you, and they deified their ancestors as gods, so one of your ancestors come and got inside of you. That's not true. None of that's true. And look at Job 13. And that is the word Eliel. Look here, Job 13. Job's Psalms. Job 13. And look here in verse. Let's read down to it. Lo, mine eye hath seen all this, mine ear hath heard and understood it. What ye know, the same do I know also. I am not inferior unto you. And Job is answering back these accusations from his friends. Surely I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. But ye are forgers of lies. Ye are all physicians of no value. Value is the word Eliel, demon. He says your physicians of idols are demons. He said the only doctrine you can do is of demons. So that word value is that word Eliel, and these translators translated it to the word daimonion. Look over here in Psalms 96. I'm trying to verify to you there's no such thing as demons. Demons are the ancient pagan gods of the old world. The demons was Hercules. These are god men. It was Tammuz. It was Adonis. It was Zoroaster. It was the female deities, the tree deities. It was Venus. It was Aphrodite. It was Diana of the Ephesians. It was Mylitta. It was all the rest of them. Look here at Psalms 96. Psalms 96 and verse 5. Honor and majesty. Now, wait a minute. Oh, no, verse 5, excuse me. For all the gods of the nations, all the gods of Ammon, Moab, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, all their gods are demons. The word idols is daimonion. These writers, these translators of the Septuagint are saying, all the gods of the pagan world are demons. Well, I think, isn't that what Paul said? Look at, he said that a couple of times. Look over here in First Corinthians 10. Look at 1 Corinthians 10. He says the same thing that these translators of the Septuagint said. Look here in, where did I say it was going? 1 Corinthians 10. Man, I get to thinking and I get to thinking ahead of myself. 1 Corinthians 10. All right. Look here in verse 18. Behold, Israel after the flesh. Are not they which eat of sacrifices partakers of the altar? What's he saying? If you eat of sacrifices of a pagan, they would offer these sacrifices in their pagan temples, then they'd take them down into the marketplace and sell this meat that they offered on their sacrifices. But Paul said those are not gods, therefore those aren't really sacrifices. You can eat the meat as long as you don't tell somebody it was offered to idols. You can go buy it down in the shambles or the marketplace, and you can buy some and take it home and cook it and eat it, but don't tell one of your friends it was offered to idols among the pagans. When they put it on their altars, all they did was cook it. It didn't go out to a god. What say I then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered unto sacrifice to idols in anything? But I say that the thing which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to daemonion, to devils. The word is daemonion. Paul is saying the same thing that the men who translated the Septuagint are saying, isn't he? He's saying the gods of the pagans are demons. Well, if a Pentecostal gets a demon in him, he's going to have to be getting some god coming down in him, some idol. Hercules has to be entering into your body. It's not some spirit out here that doesn't have any identity. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. And not to God, I would not that you should have fellowship with daemonion. Don't run around with these people that are offering sacrifice to idols, because their idols are demons. Anytime a man is going out here sacrificing to the world and giving up drinking or giving up smoking pot or giving up taking drugs, it's because he wants to have a good reputation in the community so he can get along with the bankers and the doctors and the lawyers and the Sir Thomas Club and the Lions Club, so he can make money and he can make contacts. They're offering sacrifices to idols, and we're not supposed to be doing that. Well, Paul says that the same thing, the pagans say the same thing in Acts 17. Go over to Acts 17. Paul is on his second missionary journey. On his second missionary journey, these pagans are saying the same thing that Paul said. They're saying the same thing that the translators of the Septuagint were saying when they translated this Hebrew text into Greek. And there's not any better translators than the translators of the Hebrew text into the Septuagint. Not any better translators. Even the best scholars will tell you that. These guys knew exactly what they were doing. So when you go to Acts 17, and Paul is on his second missionary journey, he agrees with all the writers of the Septuagint when they translate these words idol to daemonion or demon. He agrees, and he says it there in the 10th chapter of 1 Corinthians. He says, these idols of these pagans that they offer sacrifices to are demons or daemonion. When he's on his second missionary journey, he goes over here, he goes up here through Troas, he comes up here, goes this way, goes back through Lystra, where he meets Timothy, and he goes on up here, he hears the Macedonian call over here in Troas, he goes over here to Philippi, comes down through Thessalonica, comes on down here to Athens, Atheni. And he goes to Mars Hill, where they have all their gods set up out there on Mars Hill. And these men listen to Paul talking about the resurrection of Christ, and here's what they say to him. They say this about him. These are the men who are worshiping idol gods in Athens. And they're philosophers talking. These are not just worshipers. These are their doctors, their philosophers, they're brilliant men in Athens at Mars Hill. He gets to Mars Hill and he says, well, let's read verse 16. And Paul waited for them at Athens. And his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. All of Athens was just corrupt. We have an exact replica of the Parthenon out here at Centennial Park. And if you go inside, you've got Nike, the little god, in the hand of the mother goddess, Athena. Y'all been out there, and he's up there in her hand. It's an exact replica in Centennial Park. And the reason they have Centennial Park with a replica of the Parthenon is because they call Nashville the Athens of the South, because this is an educational center. You got Vanderbilt University, one of the foremost research hospitals in the world. You've got Meharry College, you've got Trevecca, you've got Middle Tennessee State, you've got colleges all over. This is an educational center. And so they call it the Athens of the South. Athens was where all the gods were. That's where all the educators were. And his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city given to idolatry. Therefore disputed he in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans, I'm not going to go into that, don't have time, of the Stoics, the two most popular philosophies of the day, encountered Paul, and some said, what will this babbler say? And others, some, he seemeth, now this is the pagans talking, he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange daemonion. He said, we've got our demons, and he's got a strange demon he's talking about. Remember the word demon, daemonion, among the pagans, daemon was interchangeable with the word theos. It was interchangeable to a pagan. They used either one or the other. And they said, he seems to be a setter forth of strange demons. He's got a god who's a demon that we're not familiar with. They called their gods demons. Paul called them demons in the 10th chapter of 1 Corinthians, and the Septuagint calls them demons. And then he goes down in that chapter, and he tells them in verse 22, I perceive in all things you're too superstitious. Superstitious, D-C, D-E-I-S-I-D-A-I-M-O-N, E-S-T-E-R-O-S. It means a fear of the gods, a fear of the demons. He said, you're afraid you're going to miss one of the demons. So you have made up an altar to all the gods, and you got one over here that says to the unknown demon, to the unknown God. Why is this so important? The world believes that their problems are demons. If they can cast out demons, they get up on their feet and go about their business. Men don't know who they are. They don't know who God is. They don't know what demons are. They don't know what sin is. They think sin is crime. They think sin is robbing a bank. That's what they think it is. They don't know it's just their old wicked heart that wants to do what it wants to do. And you've got all these other words. I'm going to get to, I can't seem to get to everything. I wish I could get to everything. When you read, just very quickly, in Psalms 97:7, confounded be all they that serve graven images. They boast themselves of idols. The word is elil, daemonion. You have the word shed. I've done some studies on the word shed. I'll get to that later on. And he says in Isaiah 2:8, I love this verse. I've quoted this many times. Go to Isaiah 2:8. It's a verse that I've really love. A demon is something that man makes himself. It's his imagination. That's what it is. Isaiah 2. We're talking about Septuagint translation. Isaiah 2. Now notice what he's saying here. Talking about Israel. Verse 5, O house of Jacob, come ye and let us walk in the light of the Lord. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east, and they are soothsayers like the Philistines. Israel has become soothsayers, talking to the dead gods inside the bottle. And they please themselves in the children of strangers. Their land also is full of silver, gold, neither is there any end of their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, neither is there any end of their chariots. Their land also is full of idols, elil, daemonion. The land is full of demons. They worship the works of their own hands, what they've built and made. That's what a demon is. It's an idol that you make. It's a god that you create with your own hands. Or what if I said a contract? What if I said a painting? What if I said what you've done with your hands as a football player, a basketball player, a guitar player, a piano player. What if I said it was some talent you have that you're taking credit for? That which their fingers have made. He says they worship demons, their hands made them. They make a god. Isn't that why men want money? So they can say, see what I've done? See what my hands have wrought? That's why they do it. And I'm out of time. I got much more on this. I'll come back. I want to get the word shed, S-H-E-D. I did a study on that some years ago. And whatever you find, in fact, when Israel went after that number, and they went after that troop, the word troop is Gad. It means to distribute fortunes. Over there in the 65th chapter of Isaiah, and I don't have time to go to that. There's no such thing as demons. Demons are self. But if you think you can convince somebody that believes in demons that's because they don't want to face their own sin. They want to blame it on the devil, like Flip Wilson used to say, the devil made me do it. No, Flip, you did it. And he was trying to be funny, and it was funny to a degree, but it wasn't the devil made you do it. It was you. It was your old wicked heart. I'm going to go through, I keep saying I'm going to go through every time the word daimon, I'm going to come in here one Sunday night, and we're just going to read through every time those verses are used. And when you go through and read these verses, how can a demon be a god according to the pagan people in the 17th chapter of Acts, and to be something that got inside you, making you waddle on the floor and go, stupid, isn't it? I mean, when that goofy, who's the goofy guy that was always casting out demons? No, not him. He never cast out demons. He was a demon. Bob Larson. Yeah. He'll get, there's someone out there with a demon. There's a man back here with a demon. The guy will be going, I am the devil. I'm going to come out and get you. I'm not coming out. You ever see him? And the guy that was doing that was wanting to cooperate because he was needing some attention, because he never did get it because he was so shy and backward that's the only way to get some attention. The first time you ever heard of a demon talking that way was in The Exorcist in 1973, and without William Blatty's book and movie on the subject, we wouldn't know that demons talk that way. We had to get our understanding of how demons talk from Hollywood. Demon don't talk. Demon says, hey, buddy, come here. Let me tell you something. You know, I like you. You're a really nice guy, and I just want to do something for you because I just like your looks. I think God's got something special for you. That's the way a demon talks. He don't go, bleh. I mean, how's that going to deceive anybody? Oh, let's follow the demon. He's going, bleh. So let's follow him. It's stupid, isn't it? How are you going to deceive somebody going, bleh, and your head spinning around, and you shoot pea soup all over the wall? I mean, green pea soup. I mean, good grief. No. You talk about becoming a demon. What's that little girl's name that played that? Linda Blair. She became a real demon because she got into heavy-duty drugs and sin and tried to fulfill her flesh after she did that movie. And she became a 100% bona fide demon. She ended up crazy. Well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, thank you for truth. Thank you for your word. Help us to see these things, Lord, that we'll see that it's us. The problem with the world is them, Lord. Our problem is us. Lord, you've helped us to see this, and you're helping us to repent of it, and the world won't, and that's the way it's supposed to be, Lord, and we accept it. Lead us to your elect, wherever they are. Cause us to be blunt to the point, to say these things as they need to be said. Cause us to mature in the word. Cause the flock to mature. Let them grow up, Lord, and be strong, because that's the only way to survive in an insane world like you've given us here. Thank you for your truth. Lead us to your elect. Open up many doors for the ministry, and we'll praise you for everything. In Christ's name, amen. Mercy. Well, we finished. Huh? Well, somebody took some of them home, but one of them is, I just put it up here this morning. Huh? Yeah, that one was, I just took it out this morning. Septuagint. Goodbye, Dave. Okay, take care. Love you.